So give us a overview of your book. I'm assuming this is a biography?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Biography, nonfiction. It's or memoir. It's a story of my father's. Originally my father's experience in filming, taking the only color film footage in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the aftermath of the atomic bombings. He was sent by the Strategic Bombing Survey, and he had what was then an unusual credential of having studied cinematography in college. He and a crew requisitioned a train and all the color film in the Pacific Basin and spent several months starting in Nagasaki and then later in Hiroshima filming the after effects of the atomic bomb. My father was shocked at seeing people sickening and dying still months after the bombing. He didn't know anything about radiation, and he felt called to make a record of what the effects were on human beings. So he and one other photographer, second generation Japanese American, Hari Mamura, who became a great filmmaker in Japan, the two of them set out to film people in the hospitals. And the government took the film, the footage, and classified it as top secret.
Oh.
My father spent many years trying to get access to the footage. He never could even see the developed film that he himself had shot. And he thought that if Americans saw what the atomic bomb really did, they wouldn't have supported the continued development and deployment. He never was able to, but toward the end of his life, he connected with a Japanese group, and they were able to discover that the footage was in the National Archives, although unindexed, so no one could find it. And they bought a print of the film. They raised the money through a national grassroots campaign in Japan called the 10 Feet Campaign, asking every Japanese person to contribute enough to buy 10 feet of the almost 90,000 feet of raw footage of the aftermath of the bombings. And they used that to track down some of the people in the footage who were still alive and to make a couple of short documentaries. When my father died, he died of a cancer that he believed was related to his time in the atomic bomb cities. And his last wish was to have his ashes scattered at Ground Zero in Hiroshima. And so the memoir part comes in because I followed in his footsteps and went to Japan and lived in Hiroshima for 2 years with my daughter and came to know the survivors who remembered being filmed by my father when he was a young man. So the book is a braided story of my father's first-person account of what brought him to Hiroshima, what he saw in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and what effect it had on him. My story of following his footsteps and what I learned in Hiroshima, and the first-person accounts of many of the survivors who appear in the footage. So that's it.
That's very good. I mean, when I saw the title, I originally just thought he was a part of the war and then he became a Hollywood star. I thought it was about. And so this is very shocking, but it's very intriguing, and I'm glad you wrote this. Was this something he asked for? What was the reason for you deciding to tell this story?
My father was actually part of the silent generation, they call them.
Yeah.
And they call them that for a reason. My father, like the fathers of many of my peers, didn't talk about his war experience and didn't share much, and didn't share much emotionally in general.
Mm-hmm.
When he developed the cancer, he started to speak more openly about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he spoke, he spoke to some journalists. There was coverage in some magazines and on NPR. And I tried to convince him to write a story. And he kept telling me, I'm not a writer, I'm a filmmaker, I have to show images. But he did finally have a student come over to help him make, he sort of talked to her, and he said, he was making some notes for a book. And then he died, and I found the notes, and I went to Japan with the idea of spreading his ashes the way he had asked. Turns out that's illegal in Japan. I had a memorial service for him at Ground Zero, and I decided then that what I needed to spread was his words and his experience rather than his physical ashes. I came back, and I've been working on this project for 30-some years now.
Wow.
15 years into it, I discovered that the student that he had worked with had actually recorded all their sessions and had stored the recording, submitted it to Columbia University's Oral History Library, where it was sealed because my father didn't sign a release for it. So I was able to obtain it because I'm executor. So the reason there's a first-person account of my father's experience is that I only heard his first-person account after he was dead. So he didn't exactly say, go write this book, but I came to feel that in the end, it was a mission that he had passed on, and that I had a duty to him and to the survivors to make a record of what happened and the truth of the atomic bomb impact. And yeah, so that's it.
Wow. I'm like so lost now because my next questions kind of don't go along with the vibe. But I guess the one question I will ask is, I guess off the topic, because it is difficult when you find out truth and either your family or your church or your own government is not backing you, but you still feel led to share it. What advice can you give to people who have a story, such as your dad did, but are afraid to write an autobiography or a biography on the truth they know people should hear? How did you, were there fears? Did it by any chance, were you threatened? Like, what was your process of choosing to do this?
No, I wasn't threatened, but there certainly over the years have been a lot of fears. I think my father was very afraid at different times. We have still photographs, some of which are in the book, that were produced from parts of the film. It's a 3-volume report that he did before he left the military, and he was able to take a set with him, and he would keep those and some still snapshots on the top shelf of a closet and forbid us to look at them. And he said he was afraid that if we took I wanted to take it to school, I wanted to, this. He was like, I could get in trouble. They might say I was showing obscenities to minors. I think because some of them are very gruesome and very disturbing photographs of people. And my father and I had a difficult relationship when I was growing up. I was active in the anti-war movement and in the civil rights movement. I thought my father should have been out marching with us because, I didn't know much about his story, but I knew he had seen Hiroshima and Nagasaki and that he was against nuclear weapons. And, so I felt like he was a hypocrite. He felt like I was a hippie. my husband, my late ex, was Black, and my father was not comfortable with my interracial relationship family. And I thought that made him a hypocrite too, because he was supposed to be a liberal and all that. So for me, as far as the personal side, I did struggle with how open to be in the book about some of these ambivalences. There were people who thought that I should be writing the book about from the point of view of just celebrating my dad as a hero who tried to bring this truth, which I think there is that aspect. But I felt that it was important to be honest about the 360-degree picture, because it's a human story. It's not a story of kind of cardboard characters with good guys and bad guys. It's a story. In the end, what I want to do is ask the question of why some people look at a terrible situation and make a life-affirming choice. So why did he, as a soldier, looking at these people who had been his enemies and would have, been the force that was trying to kill him? He was under attack from kamikazes, not, a matter of weeks before. And he looked at one in particular, Namata Sensei, who's the one my whole family became close to. She was a young woman at the time, and she'd lost her leg. And they brought each of these people up to the roof of the hospital to have enough light to film. And he asked her to show the stump of her leg. And when she did, she told me that he said, "Oh, that must really hurt very much." And she said, I knew from that even though he frightened me being so tall and with his big round blue eyes, that he had a kind heart. That to me is what's fascinating. There were lots of occupation forces moving through Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were, they were picking up souvenirs, and they were visiting brothels, and all of that is understandable in the aftermath of a war. People are so glad that it's over and that, they've won and all that. But it's interesting to me that someone stopped and looked at their erstwhile enemy and saw their pain.
Right.
And on the other side, the survivors whose stories I tell were looking at the people who had just destroyed everything in their world. Their bodies, their families, their homes, their futures, and saw a kindness. I think that's a fascinating human story. And to understand that, you have to understand my father is not a saint, and neither am I, and neither are they.
Right.
These are the depths that, of feeling that we all are capable of.
Right.
So that's the answer. I felt like I had to tell the whole truth to have the story mean what it's meant to mean.
Okay. And so tell me something about, because you said your relationship was kind of difficult during your process of producing this book, publishing this book. What were some things that changed or opened your mind about your dad that obviously you did, because he was so quiet and he didn't feel comfortable to speak? What were some things that you may go, oh, that's why he was this way, or that's why,
Oh boy, I'll tell you that's what the process, this book has taken 30 some years to write, precisely because if I had written it when I came back from Japan, I wouldn't have had any understanding really of who my father was or how he came to be the person I knew. I mean, when I knew him, when I was growing, he died at 63. So he died when I was 33. And I, knew him as mostly a frustrated and, he'd had a fairly successful career as a television producer. But that, and he actually used a lot of his contacts in that to try to get access to the film. I mean, he talked to Edward R. Murrow to Chet Huntley to Walter Cronkite to Robert Kennedy to Harry Truman. And the answer was always the same. And, it's not of public interest. It would just be distressing footage and, no one would have an interest in it. So he became more and more bitter and frustrated and discouraged. And he eventually, his career sort of bottomed out when I was, I guess, late high school toward the end of high school. So, the time when you feel like you're really knowing your parents is kind of high school, college, it was a very stilted relationship. We didn't really talk. We didn't know how to talk about what really mattered. And, I just knew I was right, which therefore meant he was wrong. And I didn't have a lot of patience to listen. The time when I had the patience to listen and the curiosity to wonder about why he felt the way he did came after he was gone. So he didn't talk, but I also didn't ask the good questions. So for me, the process of writing the book has been a revisiting of kind of my whole life and family, of reprocessing it through the lens of, I'm 67 now, I'm older than either of my parents lived to be. And I see human beings in a much more complex, nuanced light. And writing the book, I learned to direct that kind of greater wisdom toward my own parents, toward my father, toward myself as a young person and the mistakes I was making. So I think the process to make a meaningful book for other people, you have to have first worked through your own emotional ambivalence and anger and all the feels, as my daughter says, and reached some place of compassion for everybody involved. So yeah, that's what I learned, was to start asking myself the questions I should have asked him and then reflecting on them from what I learned from his oral history, from going through all his records, from doing a lot of research about the time period, about the war, about his life and his work in television. Just, yeah.
So with that said,
answer the question, I got carried away talking.
No, that's fine. So with that said, and this is the last question. So I know when I was in school and I was reading, history books, because in my knowledge, I wasn't connected to it, didn't care. But with that said, you said you have a daughter. You have one child or more?
I have a daughter, and then I have a stepdaughter and two grandsons. And my brother has two boys, so I have two nephews. So that's it on the next generation.
Are they aware of your dad and the impact that he had to basically world history? As far as, did they read the book? Do they understand, the story?
It's funny you say that. My daughter was with me through all of this. So yes, she did. And she has read a couple of versions of the manuscript and did a final sort of sensitivity read of the final draft for me. And she appears in the book talking some about, what she did and didn't understand as a young child in Hiroshima. So I feel like she's, fully understands. But my nephew is reading the book now, and he sent me an email. He's actually hopefully going to he says he's going to make me a video trailer for the book because he's a film and video editor, so kind of followed in my father's footsteps. And he sent me an email actually last night saying, that while there were facts in here that he knew about, that this has just been eye-opening for him, that he's, really had no full understanding of the sort of the meaning of all this in history, and also that he's coming to understand himself in new ways and see how this is part of his heritage. So that's been, kind of exciting to hear. One of the things I really wanted to do with this book, there are other books about, why was the bomb dropped, or that it wasn't necessary, or, physically what were the destruction that was involved. But I really felt like the unique thing here is that it's told from a very human level. It's, one American guy stumbling into this mess,
Right.
trying to grasp it. And I'm hoping that for people who react, as you say, most of us do, to history as like it's got nothing to do with me. And, it's just sort of some abstract thing that happened 75 years ago.
Right.
That because of that human scale, that at least, perhaps some Americans that otherwise reject debates about Hiroshima and nuclear weapons will be able to find this approachable enough to come to more of an understanding.
Wow, I don't even feel like I can follow that. I mean, definitely, I didn't judge the book by the cover, but I did judge the book by the title. And I think that's amazing that you found the strength to do that, because not just in America, but in the world, where we feel more comfortable keeping secrets, not realizing that, okay, you may die and everything's fine, but maybe 50, 60 years down the line, that secret you kept is causing people problems that you didn't even realize would cause problems. And so I'm glad that you wrote this book and that you chose to share your dad's story. I just think
Thank you. That's really sweet of you. I do think that's right. It's the stuff that gets buried that ferments and explodes.
Exactly.
It needs to be lanced. It's like racism.
Yeah.
You keep denying it and burying it, you don't fix it.
Yeah, it just keeps coming back and forth. Even when you think it's gone or you pretend it's gone, it'll just keep coming back. And so
it's what I used to have friends that would say, I prefer white bigots who will just say so to white liberals who deny, who say they're colorblind, because if you can't even say it's there, you certainly can't do anything about it.
Right.
I'm sure people say the same thing now, although those are the words from the 70s. It's the same problem.
I mean,
heartbreaking.
I don't know if it's pure denial or if it's lack of experience, because, like, for me, I would never say anything against, kind of off the subject, a woman going through her period, because I never experienced it. But I'm not going to also deny it just because I haven't experienced it. It's obviously, a thing. And I know, because I was watching The View, and Whoopi Goldberg has this CBD oil business, because she said some women go through pains worse than other. And she says she's had women say, oh, that can't be, because I haven't experienced it. And it's like, unfortunately, we have that mindset that if I haven't seen it, smelt it, touched it, it's not true, instead of stopping to say, let me hear someone else's story, because it very well could be true. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it's not a thing. So
that's true.
I hope people, and I hope they, I don't know, whatever government, people learned their lesson and choose not to continue that type of warfare, because
the scary thing is that actually they're currently trying to eliminate the restrictions on testing nuclear weapons and want to renovate and expand the arsenal. Actually, the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists, have you heard of the Doomsday Clock?
Sounds familiar.
They ever since World War II, the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists has estimated how far we are from midnight, where midnight is the end of civilization as we know it.
Okay.
And we were 7 minutes away in 1947. We're now 100 seconds away.
Okay.
It's the closest we've been to midnight ever. So the danger has not gotten better. It's gotten horrifically worse, which is why I still feel like it's important to tell.
Talk about it. Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, if it were purely historical, I still probably would have felt I should make a record and put it in the, you know, library or something by way of history. But it's not just history. It's now a threat that's greater than it was the day after they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima.
Right. Well, I'm hoping, if not teachers, students are brave enough to bring your book. Well, for those who go to school, I don't know how many schools are being open this year, but bring it to the school, because if you're going to learn about it, you might as well learn it from someone who's, you know, experienced it, as opposed to just the historian who wrote about it. Because most history books are just written by historians, not people who experienced it.
I hope so. I need to learn how to reach out to teachers and schools, because I think it would be appropriate for high schools. A couple of nuclear history professors at universities have said they would like to use it with their students, but I feel like it would, and I'm looking forward to that, but I feel like it would be good for high school students. There's nothing in it that's, you know, that they couldn't handle. I mean, it's disturbing, but it's not, you know, considering what kids read now, I don't think there's anything in it that's, you know, so gruesome or whatever that they couldn't learn from it.
The video
I do feel like it's human scale, so maybe they can relate.
Yeah, well, especially in the state you're living in, like I said, when you're in school and you don't know anyone, but for them to say, okay, someone who once lived in this state where I'm living experienced that, it may connect to them better, and their ears will be more open to hear than be mentally sleeping during the class.
Yeah, that's true.
Life: My Father's Journey in Film from Hollywood to Hiroshima by Leslie Sussan recounts Second Lieutenant Herbert Sussan's experiences filming the aftermath of the bombings in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The book inspired me to a commitment to work for peace and tolerance of all humans. Timeless perspective and a timely reminder as atomic survivors dwindle. An honest and kind personal history driven by the horror of nuclear war. Go to Hiroshima-choosinglife.com today for more information and to order your copy.